You are now listening to the StoryLogian podcast, a safe place to step into stories and connect with God's glory. And now, here is your host, Shonda Carter, aka the StoryLogian.
Hello, and welcome to the StoryLogian broadcast, the place where we explore stories like Jesus did, Matthew 13:34 through 35. All Jesus did that day was tell stories, a long storytelling afternoon. His storytelling fulfilled the prophecy. I will open my mouth and tell stories. I will bring out into the open things hidden since the world's first day. My name is Shonda Carter. I am a doctor of ministry who specializes in soul care, spiritual formation, and stepping into stories. And per usual, we have a little, maybe a lot, just depends on the episode, theology along the side. So thank you so much for joining us. Today, we are going to be discussing a parable that had me puzzled for the longest time. It is the parable of the laborers in the vineyard. When I first found out about spiritual direction, I was immediately intrigued. I had called around to a couple of schools, and I remember there was a school, I'm not going to name it, but I had an appointment with one of the directors, and he told me to read the parable of the the workers in the vineyard. Now, I was very aware of this story because it irritated me so much. Yeah, it used to irritate me. So let's just go ahead and I'll go ahead and read the story just so we can be on the same sheet of music. And I'm going to read it in the Message translation. We're going to start Matthew 20, verses 1 through 16. It says, God's kingdom is like an estate manager who went out early in the morning to hire workers from his vineyard. They agreed on a wage of $1 a day and went to work. Later, around 9 o'clock, the manager saw some other men hanging around the town square unemployed. He told them to go to work in his vineyard and he would pay them a fair wage. They went. He did the same thing at noon and again at 3 o'clock. At 5 o'clock, he went around and found still others standing around. He said, Why are you standing around all day doing nothing? They said, Because no one has hired us. He told them to go to work in his vineyard. When the day's work was over, the owner of the vineyard instructed his foreman, Call the workers in and pay them their wages. Start with the last hired and go on to the first. Those hired at 5 o'clock came up and were given $1. When those who were hired first saw that, they assumed that they would get far more. But they got the same, each one of them $1. Taking the $1, they groused angrily at the manager. These last workers put in only 1 easy hour, and you just made them equal to us, who slaved all day under a scorching sun. He replied to the one for the rest, Friend, I haven't been fair. Can't I do what I want with my own money? Are you going to get stingy because I'm generous? Here it is again, the great reversal. Many of the first ending up last, and the last first. So here on the StoryLogian broadcast, we don't like to rush through anything. So I just want you to take some time. And I mean, I understand, that when we hear this in church, we're all like, yeah, absolutely. The first should be last and the last should be first, or absolutely. What do they have to complain about? But let's just take a time because this is a safe space. Remember, let's just take the time to see what that was like. What if you were one of the first workers? Being honest. Would your attitude be similar? Has your attitude been similar? I know mine was. I'm just going to be the first to say it. I never thought that parable was fair. It took me so many years before I even got the gist of that parable and what Jesus was trying to say with that, because it sounds good on paper, but I can only imagine, like, if at work I had been slaving away for 7 years, let's say, not just one day. Let's say, if you're working somewhere for 10 years and then somebody comes in and then just boom, gets a promotion. Are we going to have that same attitude as, oh yes, the first must be last? And it's just like the parable says, it's our boss's money, but is that fair? So fair is like, sometimes it can be used like a four-letter word. So I remember thinking, okay, if this spiritual director told me to go read this story, that means God is going to do something phenomenal. I'm going to have these goosebumps and great feelings about this parable, and I'm finally going to understand it or finally agree with it. That's a loaded word right there. Agree with it. So I went back and I read the parable and I got absolutely nothing except for, I think I dug in this time. Like, that's just not fair. It's just not fair. I think that if you worked all day, you should get something. I mean, I know he said what he said, and I know I shouldn't be mad about it, but I am. And I used to pray, like, Lord, just, kind of adjust my attitude a little bit about that. And I'm here to tell you, the adjustment never came with a hallelujah moment. The adjustment came with laughter. It came in the form of this book. It's called The Return of the Prodigal Son. And I absolutely love this. He's one of my favorite authors, Henry J. M. Nouwen. Now, this is a very famous book in some of my circuits that we go through. So, with that said, I'm going to tell you just like how much laughter ensued when I read, because I love the prodigal son. I love that story, and I side with the older brother. It doesn't do me any good, but it's like I understand the older brother the absolute most in this story. So we're just going to leave it at that, because we're going to go through this parable at a later date. But for right now, Henry Nouwen, oh my goodness, he so got me as far as the parable of the laborers go. And I'm going to read what made me crack up, because only he could get away with it. I've tried it. Only Henry Nouwen can get away with a sentence, like with a paragraph like this. It hadn't previously occurred to me that the landowner might have wanted the workers of the early hours to rejoice in the generosity of the latecomers. And I'm like, yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's a godly thing. Of course, that makes perfect sense when you describe it with God, but I'm not getting the human connection. It's like, of course, God wants you to rejoice. Of course, God wants us to know that he's generous. Of course, yeah. But once again, that's on a higher level. I'm down here. I want to understand it down here. It never crossed my mind that he might have even acted on the supposition that those who had worked in the vineyard the whole day would be deeply grateful to have had the opportunity to do work for their boss, and even more grateful to see what a generous man he was. It requires an interior about face to accept such a non-comparing way of thinking. But that is a God way of thinking. God looks at his people as children of a family who are happy that those who have done only a little bit are as much loved as those who accomplish much. Now, I'm with you. Of course, this man is a genius. He has walked the walk. He has talked the talk. This book is excellent. I'm with him. And I'm like, yes, I want to be where you're at. Henry Nouwen, keep it going. God is so naive. Now that's when I lost it. I fell on the floor laughing so hard. God is so naive as to think that there would be a great rejoicing when all those who spent time in his vineyard, whether a short time or a long time, were given the same attention. Indeed, he was so naive as to expect that they would all be so happy to be in his presence that comparing themselves with each other wouldn't even occur to them. That is why he says, with the bewilderment of a misunderstood lover, why should you be envious because I am generous? He could have said, you have been with me the whole time today, and I gave you what you asked for. Why are you so bitter? It is the same bewilderment that comes from the heart of the father when he says to his jealous son, my son, you are with me always, and all that I have is yours. So, man, I'm telling you, I'm like, all right, somebody finally gets it. He said the quiet part out loud. Wow, who would have the nerve to say God is naive? But it's like, I've never felt so understood in all of my life. I would never dare say that. So, through this book, oh my goodness, I'm telling you, I got permission to explore those thoughts. And that is the whole purpose of stories, right? Permission to explore those thoughts. For someone to go out in front of us to see that behavior modeled. We all compare, we'll say, oh, you're ungrateful like the Israelites. But do we have to just sum it up? Can we step into their shoes for a little bit and see that they were scared? I'm not saying they're right, but when we just rush to you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, it doesn't create lasting changes. So I'm going to continue, and I hope I don't get a copyright violation because this book was just so monumental in this. Here lies hidden the great call to conversion, to look not with the eyes of my own low self esteem, but with the eyes of God's love. As long as I keep looking at God as a landowner, a father who wants to get the most out of me for the least cost, I cannot but become jealous, bitter, and resentful toward my fellow workers who are my brothers and sisters. But if I'm able to look at the world with the eyes of God's love and discover that God's vision is not that of a stereotypical landowner or patriarch, but rather that of an all giving and forgiving father who dares not measure out of his love to his children according to how well they behave, then I quickly see that my only true response can be deep gratitude. So, what do you think of that? I mean, I wish that I was smart enough to have come up with that on my own, but I don't think I would have ever dared to say it, not like he said it. Even sometimes when I try to share this book with others and I say there's a sentence in there that says that God is naive, oh my gosh, you would have thought that I said I would have planned a crime or something. It's like I get immediately shut down, like, no, no, you can't say that. No, no. But it's the freedom in that expression. It's the freedom in exploring this story. It's all about freedom and gratitude. And also, while I was preparing for this, I know I read a lot, but like I was doing a little studying to see if I really, for real, got the gist of the parable. And I had to admit, it's like, yeah, I get it. I'm just still not 100% there. And it was not until God said, well, because you view yourself as an older brother, what happens when you view yourself as a prodigal son? What happens when you compare yourself to the saints that went before you, to the martyrs that had their heads chopped off, to Peter, Mark, Luke? They've been working. They worked a lot longer and a lot harder. I proudly say that I got saved a little later in life. What if that was their attitude? Would I want God to have that same attitude with me now? Like, oh, you just kind of slipped in. It's like, yeah, I'm trying to make up for lost time, but there was a lot of years that I wasn't working. So it's amazing how when you step into the story and step into somebody else's shoes, or the character that you don't think that you are or that you don't necessarily identify with, you might see a vast difference. For so long, I've been the older brother because I'm an older sister. I just related to, hey, that brat gets away with a lot of stuff. So I did bring my own humanity in there. And I'm glad that God was honoring enough to help me understand this on a human level as well as a spiritual level. I thank him so much because he is patient. He is long suffering. He does walk me through. He does accept my questions and accept my tantrums and helps me through them. Now, I do get a good little swat now and then, like, hey, knock it off. Absolutely, when it's got one coming. But when I'm genuinely trying to understand, he will walk with me and talk with me and sit with me and help me to understand. So I hope that this has helped you as far as that goes. I kind of wish that this was live so I could get some questions going with this, but I really just wanted to get this one out because this helped me so much as far as the kingdom of heaven is like this. And if we're going to continue to preach the word, to teach the word, you have to accept that the kingdom of heaven is like this. And I know that we can put these things into modern times and we can look at the bigger picture with all the modern things, but sometimes it starts right here with your attitude, with your perceptions, with wanting to be the hero, with wanting to be right in the story, with wanting there to be an absolute right or wrong in each story. Humans are complicated. A good story will show that no one is always 100% right and no one is always 100% wrong. And I'm talking about human beings. I am not talking about, so we're not going to go all the way over there. If you have to wrestle with the story, you have to wrestle with the story. Take it to God. Wrestle with the story. God shares these stories with all these with all these vulnerabilities, with all of these flaws in behavior. It is not a map that we should follow exactly, but it's definitely a big picture blueprint. So while that was a biblical story, I want to share that in comparison to a psychological story that I heard. A professor of psychology offered a class the opportunity for everyone in the class to get 95% on the final, but the whole class would have to vote for this unanimously. Without fail, he never had to deliver on giving everyone the automatic 95%. Because year after year, there was always a group of people that did not want others to get the same grade as them because they felt like they had worked harder than others. Usually it was around 20 people or so that voted against it. Statistically, the professor stated that about 10 students total would receive the grade of 95% or higher, meaning their perception of their efforts was greater than what they had actually imagined to achieve on average. I think it's an interesting thought experiment to consider that there will always be people that would rather see you fail than guarantee their own success simply because they believe themselves more deserving of success and happiness than you. And that is often not the best strategy for even their own success. Now, this is not to point out that, things shouldn't be fair. This is not to point out that you should not work hard and that everyone deserves everything. This is not to point that out. It is not meant for that, but rather to point out that no matter how hard you work, there is always someone out there that thinks they work harder and do more and deserve more than you out of life. And they would rather just see you lose, even so much to their detriment. So that story comes in a spiritual book, and that story comes and there's a story of it in the form of a psychological experiment. To this day, I have not found a funnier interpretation, a funnier or a realer dissecting, stepping into that story. And I absolutely, to this day, love and appreciate that story. And my heart is full of gratitude. And I'm not going to say it's 100% of the time, but sometimes you got to settle for an A, even if it's not a 100. So I'm getting an A as far as when it comes to this parable. I've improved my grade. I've done extra credit. So there's still hope for you as well when it comes to things like this. This podcast is to step into story. It is not to give you a lecture. It is not to tell you how to think. It is just to expose you to the story, as it says in Matthew 13:34 through 35. What did that say again? Let's see. All Jesus did that day was tell stories, a long storytelling afternoon. His storytelling fulfilled the prophecy. I will open my mouth and tell stories. I will bring out into the open things hidden since the world's first day. So, what did this story bring out of you? What has been hidden? As I explained, mine wasn't really that hidden. I had always stood on the fact that that's not fair. But what was hidden was the fact that I thought a little more highly of myself than I ought. So there's still more to learn when it comes to these stories. No matter how many times you've read it, no matter how many times you've explored it, no matter how many Bible studies you've done on it, and no matter how many times you've heard it preached. Thank you once again for joining us. If you liked this podcast, if you like this story, if you like this episode, could you please, you can give us a like, you can give us a share, you can give us a comment, or you can subscribe to the podcast. I am Shonda Carter, the StoryLogian. Thank you so much for listening and spending this time stepping into this story. See you next time. Send me some comments on the story that you'd like to explore.